Good evening. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of our America at a Crossroads leadership team, which aside from me includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former Los Angeles County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. A very special welcome to Chancellor Julio. Frenk. My BA and JD degrees from UCLA during the Chancellor Young years. I'm especially proud to have our program host Chancellor Frenk tonight. And of course, a warm welcome to Larry Mantle, our superb moderator. For those in our audience who observe the Jewish holidays, we hope you found this week's Rosh Hashanah meaningful and renewing. One of my rabbis spoke about the importance of finding joy and positivity even in dark times, and he mentioned this short Hasidic tale. A Chassid, it's a religious Jew, once came to Reb Nachman of Bratslav and cried, "Rabbi, the world is dark, full of suffering and despair." And the rabbi replied, "If you cannot find the light, then make the light yourself. Even a small flame can drive away a great darkness, and with that flame comes joy." So on behalf of our team, we wish you, especially during these very challenging times, and what will surely be a challenging year, that we each remember to seek out the light, and a reminder that each of us has the power, maybe even the duty, to drive away despair and to find joy and hope even in these difficult times. And I'll say, Gmar Chatima Tova, may you be sealed in the book of life. Because of the high holidays and the holiday of Sukkot, our schedule the next couple of weeks is different. Next week, it's Tuesday, September 30th from 10 to 11:30. That program is being produced by the UCLA Center for Israel Studies and the UC Berkeley Diller Institute for Israel Studies together with America at a Crossroads. The program's title is 30 Years Since Oslo. Why did the Accords fail, and can the Israeli-Palestinian peace process be salvaged? The guests are the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and former Foreign Minister of the PA, Nasser Al-Kidwa. The following week, on October 9th, our special event immigration program, Raids, Rights, and Reckonings, America's Immigration Crossroads, will be on October 9th. That's Thursday at our usual time, 5 o'clock. You can register for these and all of our October programs in the email that you'll get after tonight's program. Thank you, as always, for your support of our programming. A special note for those of you who have donor-advised funds, October 9th will mark the second annual DAF Day. That's Donor Advised Fund Day. Who knew there was such a thing? But there is. We do accept DAF donations here at America at a Crossroads, Jews United for Democracy and Justice. We encourage you to celebrate October 9th, DAF Day, by donating to us to help support this great programming we do. Instructions for sending your DAF donation is at our donate link and on all of our emails. Just send me an email if you can't find it, and I'll send you the instructions. And by the way, if you don't have a DAF, you can still make a donation on DAF Day or any other day, and we really appreciate your generosity. Now, please welcome my friend of many decades, fellow UCLA Bruin, two-time UCLA grad and recently retired UCLA faculty member, and my partner together with Mel in this America at a Crossroads series, Zev Yaroslavsky. Zev, the program's yours.
Thank you, Janice, and good evening to our audience, wherever you may be and all around the world. Tonight, we're honored to have as our guest UCLA's seventh chancellor, Julio Frenk. Chancellor Frenk is a fourth-generation physician whose paternal grandparents fled Germany in the 1930s to build a new life in Mexico. He became UCLA's chancellor on January 1st of this year. Prior to coming to UCLA, Julio served as president of the University of Miami in Florida, dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and the T&G Angelopoulos Professor of Public Health and International Development. And from 2000 to 2006, he served as the Federal Secretary of Health of Mexico, where he was responsible for initiating the first comprehensive universal coverage program known as Seguro Popular, that provided health care access to more than 55 million previously uninsured persons. This is quite a resume. In his first week in his new job, Chancellor Frenk was met with several crises, not least of which was the worst disaster in Los Angeles history, the January 7th fires, which at one point threatened the UCLA campus and its neighbors, and also impacted hundreds, if not more, of university faculty and staff who lost their homes. It was not long before the Trump administration decided it would respond to issues of anti-Semitism on UCLA UCLA's campus by withholding over $500 million in scientific research funds and imposing a nice round number, a $1 billion fine on the nation's #1 public university, threatening its sustainability. Julio is an intelligent, inclusive, and motivational leader who is guided by uncompromising moral clarity and by a life's journey which makes him uniquely qualified to lead one of the world's greatest institutions of higher learning, and it's been a privilege to get to know him over this last year. Our moderator this evening is none other than Larry Mantle, who is no stranger to our audience. Larry is celebrating his 40th anniversary on public radio as the host of Air Talk on LAist, NPR's local affiliate. Larry is truly an institution in our community, and indeed I refer to him as our Walter Cronkite. Most of the audience remembers who Walter Cronkite is or was. Larry, our team and our audience are so fortunate to have you as part of the America at a Crossroads team, and I turn the program over to you.
Zev, thank you so much. Your words always mean so much to me, and it's always a pleasure to be able to work on these America at a Crossroads programs, to speak with such remarkable guests about the important topics that we do. And when it comes to higher education and the challenges you just delineated that UCLA faces, well, we could be here all night talking about what the university, its administration, its faculty, staff, and students are doing in responding to this moment in higher education generally. And Janice, Mel, thank you as well. It's always an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation with Chancellor Frenk for weeks now because of all these important issues and wanting to hear what he has to say about the challenges at the university. Chancellor Frenk, thank you very much for joining us on America at a Crossroads.
Thank you for this invitation. It's a great honor. And thank you, Zeb, for your very generous introduction, and Janice for the opportunity to be here this evening.
Chancellor, the Los Angeles Times and reporter Javed Kaleem have detailed the Trump administration's settlement proposal for UCLA. It includes that fine that Zev just talked about, nearly $1.2 billion tied to allegations of anti-Semitism and civil rights violations at UCLA. The Justice Department claiming the university failed to protect Jewish students from those on campus who directed their anger at Israel against their fellow students. So first, to what extent do you think that UCLA did fail its Jewish students and was not sufficiently vigilant for the rights and protections for Jewish students?
Let me first start by acknowledging that we are going through a period of unprecedented challenges for higher education. Universities have a long history of dealing with crisis, but I think what we're seeing nowadays is something that none of us have seen during our lifetimes. Unfortunately, universities have been caught up in the general climate of polarization that characterizes our society in general. And I think it's going to take a very deliberate and concerted effort to move from polarization to pluralism, accept that there's a diversity of viewpoints, and that part of the most important contributions that a university does to a society is to serve as an exemplary institution and set an example of how we can process differences through the use of reason and dialogue, and never through the use of hatred and violence. That's my overall goal in joining this great institution, now 106 years old. I do think that we need to acknowledge that there's been a rise in anti-Semitism in American universities and in society in general, and that part of that definitely affected what happened here at UCLA. Just before we got this findings from the Department of Justice, starting with the anti-Semitism as a result of an investigation, we had actually settled a lawsuit that was brought by several Jewish students and a faculty member, acknowledging the reason we had settled was that we acknowledged that there had been some failures in the way we had responded or on the way we had to protect our Jewish students. Now, the issue we have right now is that the events that we're talking about happened a year and a half ago, happened between the end of April and the first days of May of 2024. Even before I arrived here during the summer of 24, the University of California system revised its policies on time, place, and manner for public expression and reaffirmed its absolute policy to ban any form of discrimination, including, of course, anti-Semitism. Shortly after I arrived on June 1st, and because I had the privilege of being able to spend about a week per month between August and December when I finally moved to LA, I heard loud and clear that the number one request was to do something about anti-Semitism on campus.
Let's get specific as to what this means. So if you have instances, again, as was detailed by a number of UCLA students who are Jewish, who their access to classes were blocked, they were shouted down, they were shoved, it was demanded that they were anti-Zionist. They were in many ways intimidated and physically manhandled by students who were critical of Israel. If incidents like that happen again, what is the university planning to do to protect students and to directly deal with perpetrators of anti-Semitism or any other form of discrimination that becomes physical like that?
If anything happens like that, we will act immediately because we now have very clear rules. And let me tell you what's been happening. First of all, we created a new office for campus safety, campus and community safety, directly reporting to the chancellor. My first recruitment was the head of that office. Stephen Lurie has a 30-year history at the LAPD. He's a Bruin, he's also a lawyer, and he happened to be the liaison of the LAPD with the Jewish community in LA. He has extensive experience, and we now have a very clear set of protocols and policies, and we are determined to enforce them. Secondly, the university established, like many universities, a task force on anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias. It produced its report on October of 2024, just before I arrived. I met with the chair, Professor Stuart Gabriel, and I told him, this is not going to be one more of those reports that just sits somewhere. We're going to implement. So I have created a UCLA initiative to combat anti-Semitism, to implement the three main recommendations of that task force. One is to greatly increase our educational activities. Second, to facilitate the reporting of incidents. And for example, we are about to announce the recruitment of a Title VI officer. For the audience, that's the Title VI and Title VII in the Civil Rights Code that deal with issues of discrimination. And then finally, to have a clearer and very strict enforcement of the rules. Very importantly, as a result of an act of violence against one of the UC regents who lives here in LA, I suspended Students for Justice in Palestine, both the undergraduate and the graduate branches of that organization, because those were the people who had instigated that attack on the personal property of one of our regents. It could have been anyone. We would have acted the same way. It was not because it was a regent, it was because it was an act of violence. And every time there's an act of violence, that violates the fundamental principle of universities, which is no violence, dialogue. We have started a series building on a whole series of dialogues across difference, part of our initiative for the study of hate, to try to neutralize expressions of hate. And during these few months that I've been here, there's been 3 attempts all by Students for Justice in Palestine to stage demonstrations. We have acted swiftly and avoided any demonstration during this month. We haven't had a single incident with our Jewish students.
Chancellor Frenk, of course, there are some members of the UCLA community that are concerned that the pendulum is going to swing too far in the opposite direction, and that the opportunity to criticize Israel's policies, to hold demonstrations, to raise attention for the cause of the Palestinian people or other causes the students want to support that's highly controversial in the community, that they would be kept from doing that. So what do you say to those who are concerned that this could lead to an infringement on free speech on campus?
We are defenders of free speech. Free speech is the essence of life in a university. And to be able to have that speech be free, it's essential that the campus have a safe environment where everyone can express freely. That requires shared rules. And that starts with the basic premise of the use of reason and dialogue to process differences, which is what free speech allows, never the use of hatred and violence. This is not dependent on the issue or the position of the person around an issue. This is not specific to what's happening right now in Israel and Gaza, and it's not specific to the position of people. The fundamental principle is that one. You cannot allow acts of violence to deal with differences, because that actually negates free speech and makes it unsafe to speak freely.
Let's take a concrete example when it comes to anti-Semitism. Harvard and Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance principles for what constitutes anti-Semitism, and that's a divisive standard even among some American Jews. One of the prongs of that, for example, is labeling anti-Semitic the application of double standards of behavior for Israel compared to other democracies. That can be in the eye of the beholder as to what's a double standard. So I wonder, is UCLA looking at adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? If it's not, how will your administration define what, in fact, is anti-Jewish attacks?
Well, Larry, that goes very much to what you were saying before. It's one thing to criticize a government of a country. In this case, let's say the Netanyahu government. But once that criticism, which is valid expression, free speech to criticize what a government does, once that becomes a criticism of an entire country, so it's not this particular government is doing something I disagree. It's now Israel that's doing that. And then it's that further expansion of that circle to include an entire people, the Jewish people. It's that subtle progression from the valid criticism of policies to characterizing an entire country where, by the way, 20% of the citizens are not Jewish, and then characterizing the entire Jewish people living in Israel or anywhere else. That is anti-Semitic. And I think if we can agree, because you don't see it for other countries. We don't go saying, oh, I don't like what President Trump is doing. You don't then say, I don't like what America is doing. You don't then say, it's the fault of all Americans, no matter where they live. We do that specifically when it comes, it's done in this current climate, when it refers to the policies of the Israeli government, then to Israel, then to Jewish people all over. And that, to me, is a clear example of anti-Semitic creep.
But I think arguably the IHRA definition would be even further restrictive and label anti-Semitic, going beyond, I think, what you just described. There might be viewers who might disagree with my characterization of that, but it seems to me the IHRA is a bit more restrictive. So would you consider going as far as the IHRA definition or not?
I do not interpret that definition to mean that you couldn't criticize a particular government, the current government or a future government of the state of Israel as falling into that definition. I think it's when you take the other steps, and when that's uniquely about Israel and Jewish people, I do think that becomes anti-Semitic because the one-sidedness here refers to Israel and Jews uniquely.
Okay.
Is where you have that distinction.
Okay, but under this, the definition of the alliance, which would say, well, holding a double standard, criticizing Israel disproportionately for its actions in a way that you wouldn't criticize other democracies, it sounds like you're saying criticism is fine as long as that does not carry over into characterizing the Jewish people because of what Israel has done.
Not what Israel. This is exactly the point I'm making. It's a government. It's when you go from the government to Israel to Jews. That to me is the progression of anti-Semitism. So let's not do that. I need to tell you, this is for me. This is not an abstract discussion. This is extremely personal. As you probably heard from Zeb's introduction, my grandparents were forced to flee their home in Hamburg, Germany, with their young son, 6 years old, my father, and my aunt, who was 4 years old. They had to leave because of an intolerable climate of anti-Semitism that they were suffering. Members of the family who didn't do the same, who thought that this would pass, did not survive. My wife is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Her father was taken in at age 15, came out of the camps at age 20, with his entire family except one half-brother having been murdered. He was totally alone. This, for us in our family, this is core. This is very personal. So my commitment is to make sure that the horrors we have lived and that our families, both my family and my wife's family, suffer through, never happen again. And it's not going to happen at UCLA, I guarantee you.
Chancellor, UC faculty won a preliminary injunction against almost all of the nearly $600 million in federal grants that had been suspended by the Trump administration. Do you think UC needs to do more as this longer trial plays out over the fate of that funding? Do you think the region should file a lawsuit? Do you think that the University of California needs to take an even stronger stand?
Yeah, I mean, then now let's come to the suspension of the grants. I am a strong defender. I have made it one of my top priorities to fight anti-Semitism on the campus because, as I said, this is a very personal cause, and because we need to do it. And I'll tell you in a minute why I think it's an imperative for universities at this particular moment. But let me answer your question. The point that I made in an announcement when we got that letter announcing the suspension of almost $500 million, more than $500 million in 800 grants that were suspended, is that while we are committed to fight anti-Semitism, suspending funds for research does nothing to deal with the problem of anti-Semitism. In fact, it can probably make it worse for two reasons. One is that now we hear people saying, well, you see, it's because the Jewish faculty are complaining so much. Now I had my grant canceled. The other is that, we have a lot of researchers who are Jewish themselves, whose own research is being now suspended. So there is a real problem with anti-Semitism. We need to tackle it, but cutting funding for life-saving and life-transforming research doesn't address the problem of anti-Semitism. So we are trying to make that case, and we're following a strategy with 4 avenues, 4 tracks. One is litigation. We just had, although that particular trial was not filed by the University of California, it was a class action by a number of faculty members in the University of California who filed a lawsuit, and the judge has now issued a temporary restraint restoring those funds. The second is negotiation, talking to the other side. We believe in talking and trying to make our case where we try to demonstrate that we are serious about fighting anti-Semitism and that suspending research is not a way to deal with that problem. There are other ways which we're willing to embrace and deepen and go even further than the actions I've already described. The third is mitigation. We have been very focused on providing bridge funding to avoid our top talent from going elsewhere, because that would be really irreparable damage if we lose our top talent. So we've been actively trying to mitigate and provide support so that that research can continue. And then the fourth is communication, just saying what I'm doing, and that's why I'm so appreciative for this opportunity. But we are pursuing the four avenues as valid avenues to try to solve this problem.
As these negotiations proceed, if the motivation of the Justice Department is really to address anti-Semitism at UCLA, perhaps the arguments will carry the day that the university is doing enough to protect Jewish students and to make certain that anti-Semitic incidents are effectively dealt with. If the motivation is to punish UCLA, if the stated motivation isn't the underlying motivation, if that's the case, what does University of California leadership need to do?
Well, I cannot speculate about implicit or latent motivations. We have an official document following an investigation. There was an investigation. It says there's a charge for anti-Semitism, for discrimination in admissions, and for Title IX violations, mostly through issues of transgender athletes competing in women's sport. We are answering each of those, and we're first demonstrating what I've said now, and by the way, I'm not saying we've done enough. I'm through this initiative to combat anti-Semitism, we're planning to go even further. Similarly, on the other two charges, those are valid concerns, and we need to address them. And that's what our focus is. My other focus is I need to make sure that UCLA comes out of this as the top research university that it is today. And that means making sure that we can restore the funding to all of the current projects and that we can continue to compete for funding beyond this particular episode.
To what extent has the uncertainty around these massive numbers and dollar amounts of grants affected the ability to do research and the retention of talent? Have you suffered losses of key personnel? Has there been research that's actually been delayed because of uncertainty whether federal funding was going to be honored?
So far, we have not suffered yet any loss of talent, and I'm actively trying to avoid that because, as I said, that would be generational harm. It takes decades to recruit the incredibly talented faculty we have here. And of course, many other universities are actively trying to recruit. They are very good researchers. So my number one priority is to avoid that. I'm meeting personally with the researchers. We have gone for each of the 800 grants that were suspended, grant by grant, to try to provide that bridge funding. Now, this recent court decision restores that funding, but that's for this period. We need to make sure that coming out of that, first of all, I don't know if there will be a further legal challenge to that decision of the court, but this is a long-term goal. We need to be able to continue to fund the life-saving research that we do here for the indefinite future. It's not just about solving one particular issue. That was a great relief, but we need to be able to continue to benefit from what by the way are not handouts from the government. These are contracts with universities to carry out on behalf of the federal government and of the taxpayers very high quality research. And that's what I need to make sure that we have the ability to continue doing that.
You mentioned, Chancellor, about the Trump administration and its demands over transgender athletes and making clear that transgender athletes are particularly transgender women athletes are not going to be competing in women's sports and the like. But I wonder about the medical care that UCLA Health provides, surgical and hormonal care to transgender patients. Is this something that the medical system is going to stop providing because of demands of the Trump administration?
First of all, the athletes issue is it's that doesn't happen. Actually, the NCAA policies don't allow that. So that is not something that's not an issue we're dealing with on this particular campus. We have to be clear that what we're talking about is treatment for minors, not in general. We're talking about minors, people under 19 years of age. Right now, we are no longer doing surgeries in that front, and some patients who are on hormonal treatment, of course, that needs to continue. And we are going to have to follow whatever rules the federal government proposes in this respect. But so far, that is it's a limited scope, and we'll have to see how that evolves. What is the policy of the federal government in terms of that particular topic?
Chancellor, there are prohibitions demanded by the Department of Justice on using indirect diversity, equity, and inclusion methods for the hiring, promotion, and tenure granting of members of the university community. And I'm wondering, would this rule out recruitment efforts where the university could go into communities that are predominantly Black or Latino to try and recruit people to diversify the campus environment? Is this something that the university is acting on?
Yes, of course, California had Proposition 209 many years ago that doesn't allow the use of race in considerations either for hiring or for admitting students. Then we have the more recent Supreme Court decision, and what we are going to do is assure that we are compliant with both Prop 209, which we have been compliant for all these years, and the specific parameters of the Supreme Court decision. I believe in the rule of law. I believe we need to teach our students to follow the rule of law. If you don't like the law, in a democracy, you can actually take action like voting to change the law. But the law, whatever it is, even if you don't like it, you need to comply with it. And we will be fully compliant with those two elements, Prop 209 and Supreme Court.
Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the Supreme Court decision is that you can go into specific communities for recruitment. You can't use race or ethnicity as decision factors for admissions, for example. But there's a reference to indirect methods being used to fulfill DEI aims by the university. So I'm wondering, first, how do you even interpret that? What do you think is meant by indirect? And how far would the university be willing to go to try and meet however the administration defines that?
I think we're actually conducting right now a review to assure that we are compliant with what we think is the current legal framework, and that's the Supreme Court decision. That's the that is the law that we need to follow. I'm sure there's going to be interpretations, and that's what lawyers do, and we'll let the lawyers define and decide what are the specific cases. But the basic thrust of the Supreme Court decision is what we need to follow. That's what we have as a clear guiding principle in this case.
How are the negotiations with the Department of Justice progressing? Do you have any sort of a timeline in mind when you're thinking that a resolution could be reached?
I don't participate directly on those negotiations, so I don't have any visibility into the timeline. I know that there are a series of principles that we are absolutely need to safeguard. To me, there are three really critical principles. We need to assure that there's no interference, government interference, in who we hire, who we admit, and what we teach or do research on. And to me, those are the pillars of academic freedom. We need to preserve that, and that's the fundamental principle upon which universities are based. And
the federal. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the principles. I'm sure, because we have seen this with other universities, that there is room to have conversation. What we're doing now is have a conversation. We're trying to show and demonstrate what we've been done on the substantive accusations of anti-Semitism, of use of race in admissions, and on the transgender issue. And that's where we are. But to your question, I don't have strict visibility on that.
Are there areas that are in that 28-page document that you look at and you just say, this is a non-starter with us? This is not something we can adhere to. It would fundamentally go against the character of UCLA and our mission as an organization. Are there any things in that demand letter that you just say, this really is non-negotiable for us, we can't do it?
I will leave that to the people who are actually carrying out those conversations. I think the principles are very clear. They've been stated. There's policies for the University of California, of which UCLA is a member, is party to. And we'll have to see what evolves and what comes up. In all the cases that we've seen, there's a distance between what's in every negotiation. There's a distance between what's put out at first and what is the final outcome. So I don't think I should speculate on where we will end. The principles are very clear. What red lines we cannot cross.
Okay, and can you elaborate more? You say the principles are clear. Could you give an example?
It's the three issues that I mentioned. And no government interference with decisions who we hire, specifically about faculty, who we admit as students, and what we teach and do research on. That's the core of academic freedom.
One of the demands is that UCLA vet applicants from abroad to determine if they hold anti-Western, anti-American views. Now, I don't know how you would find that out short of examining social media for international student applicants, but is that something that UCLA would be prepared to do? And if so, how would you define what's considered to be anti-Western or anti-American?
I can't comment on that because what you're referring to is a document that was leaked. And there's a parallel process going on, which is right now in process. All of these may be issues that are become non-issues. So I don't want to speculate. It's somebody leaked that document, and to elaborate on something that is not an official. It's not an outcome. It's all hypothetical. It's speculative. So I prefer not to speculate on how that.
Let's go to some viewer questions. And thank you all for participating. You can put any questions that you'd like in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Let's see. We have a question from Steve. Is UCLA and the UCLA system leading an effort with other universities to oppose the federal government's withholding of grant funding.
Yes, we have participated from the beginning in most of the legal action I'm talking about from the very beginning, some of the measures to reduce the indirect cost recovery and others. And so, yeah, we're clearly participating in that effort.
Tom in Rochester asks, will UCLA avoid caving in as Columbia and some other universities have, and uses Harvard as an example of one who has not cowed to the administration's demands?
All of these universities, including Harvard, are in conversation because it is the federal government. We need to solve the problem of sustainable funding for research. As I said before, on the substantive issues, particularly anti-Semitism, which has been the most important of the substantive findings, we are totally in agreement that we need to do more to fight anti-Semitism. And there's no issue with that. So I think we need to separate one part of this conversation, which is totally aligned on the issue of anti-Semitism. Now, the means to achieve that end, we believe are not appropriate. Cutting research doesn't help anti-Semitism. So the other part is, how do we restore research? Well, we demonstrate a bona fide focused effort to deal with the main of the allegations, which is anti-Semitism.
Zem says, aside from violence, does anti-Semitism fall into the rubric of free speech? I assume Zem is referring to the fact that the First Amendment does protect hate speech, for example. But when it comes to UCLA and what's tolerated on campus, what's the difference here?
Well, I mean, look, I do believe that I don't want to get into an abstract discussion. I want to be very, very clear. There's three reasons to fight anti-Semitism. Reason number one is to protect our Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Reason number two is to protect our non-Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Because once we allow one form of bigotry to go on, no group is safe. And the third reason, which is something that we don't talk a lot about, is we need to fight anti-Semitism to save the universities. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the historic record, a century ago, German universities occupied the place of global preeminence that America's or universities occupy today. Today, if you look at the rankings of the top 20 universities in the world, typically about 15 of the top 20 are American. If there had been rankings in the 1920s and 30s, 15 of the top 20 would have been German universities plus the University of Vienna in Austria. Today, 100 years later, there is 0 German universities on that list. And it all started with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism led to the loss of enormous amount of talent, Jewish researchers, many of whom, by the way, came to the United States and helped win the war. Second, anti-Semitism corrupted the soul of the university. It was in universities that all the pseudoscience that justified the racist laws, the Nuremberg laws, that pseudo-research was carried out in universities. And probably the worst thing, the worst breach of medical ethics in human history, which were the experiments on the prisoners in the concentration camps, the horrific experiments. Those were designed by professors in the schools of medicine. Anti-Semitism destroyed the images we have of book burning during the Nazi period. Those were libraries in universities. So my point is, we need to combat anti-Semitism to save universities. In addition to protecting our Jewish students and everybody else.
But let's talk about how far the university can go, because as I said before, the government can't act against people for hate speech alone. The UC system is a public institution, but UC campuses, you do have the ability to say certain speech is not tolerable on campus, correct? That this is a hostile environment, is damaging to our educational mission here and
Correct.
damaging to members of our community. So how far can you, where's that line for the UC system?
Well, I think, it's all the fact that to be a member of a university, you need to believe that that one of the most important roles that universities play in society is to serve as a vehicle for dealing with differences. Differences of opinion are good. We're not against that. We actually not just tolerate, we celebrate differences of opinion. But we process them through reason and dialogue and not through hatred and violence. So to me, speech that's hateful, that creates an environment that makes students feel unsafe, like what happened during some of the encampments, is not acceptable. And that is to me the criterion. That is the essence of a university. We stop enforcing that idea of processing difference through dialogue and reason. We stop creating a code of mutual respect, and we corrupt the essence of the university, which is what happened to German universities 100 years ago.
Brian asks, would UCLA have allowed Charlie Kirk to speak on campus given the new policies of UCLA?
Of course we would. That yes, so long as it was within the time, place, and manner regulations, we would, of course, have allowed him.
Those time, place, and manner regulations, do those allow for overnight or establishing of encampments, as we saw on UCLA's campus, which led to the conflicts?
No, they do not. And that's why, anytime now that there's been any attempt to violate the rules, we immediately, with the new structure that we have designed, this new Associate Vice Chancellor for Campus and Community Safety reporting directly to me, we act immediately and we prevent it. My professional field is public health. I do believe in prevention, not in reaction. And we haven't had a single encampment since I've been here, and even since last summer, but certainly not since I've been here since January of this year.
Ali says, I'm a current UCLA student. I'm a Bruin. And while I appreciate the work you're doing, the problem goes beyond students into the faculty. I remember when UCLA offered us a safe space to come online to discuss what we were feeling, and anti-Zionist behavior wasn't shut down until I complained. How will you deal with and educate your faculty moving forward?
That's a very important question, and that's why the initiative to combat anti-Semitism, the number one item in which they're working, is to deepen our educational endeavors, and that does include faculty, in addition to students and faculty and staff. In the end, Larry, I think it is all about creating a climate where we agree on some basic rules of mutual engagement. And this is not a legalistic element. This is, to me, the essence of being an educational institution. And I think there are two principles upon which we can all agree. One is the inherent dignity of every human being, which means that every one of us deserves the respect of everyone else. And the other is the idea that we will, while we respect very much the identity that any person wants to hold, we should resist the notion of creating categories of people that then will dehumanize as the others. And it's this othering, this creation of categories where we flatten individualities. That is what leads eventually to hatred and to discrimination, or worse, as we have seen.
Several of our viewers have asked, and I'll try and paraphrase the question, but saying, Israel is a democratic society, and protesting Israel's actions and the actions of the IDF seem to be appropriate, these viewers are saying. You had suggested that the only acceptable protest is against the government of Israel, not protesting against Israel. And they'd like you to comment on that. So as I'm understanding that, is saying, well, Israel's a democracy, and there has been at some point majority support for the Netanyahu government. So, is it really anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, since it is a democracy, and the Israeli government and the IDF is an extension of that democracy?
Well, but this is exactly the point I'm making. Israel is a complex society. It's a diverse society. It's a democratic society. The government is not equal to the society. And that particular, the state of Israel is not equal to the Jewish people. And what I find unique, and this is what I do think is anti-Semitic, is the creeping from a criticism of a government to a criticism of a state, of a nation, to a criticism of an entire people. We don't see that. We don't criticize, let's say, Vladimir Putin, and then say Russia is killing Ukrainians, and then say every Russian around the world is to be criticized and dealt with in discriminatory words, or be the object of hate expressions. That's what I'm trying to exactly to convey, that we cannot create these categories that then don't allow us to see those real important differences between a government, the entirety of a society organized as a nation state, and the entire of a people.
Barbara says, I'm wondering how safe Muslims feel on your campus. At Harvard, Muslim students feel less safe than Jewish students do. And I don't know what Barbara's citing, if that's a poll of students, I'm not sure. But says, I'm neither Jewish nor Muslim, but I'm wondering what's being done to ensure that Muslim students are protected and safe on the UCLA campus.
What I said before is actually a reason to fight anti-Semitism, is to also protect our non-Jewish, including our Muslim students. We cannot accept bigotry, discrimination, hatred against one group and think that it will stay there. History also shows us that if one group is attacked and we allow that to go on, everyone is unsafe. So this applies to all of our students. We do not accept any form of harassment or discrimination against any group, including, of course, our Muslim students and every other group.
As a result of all the media coverage of charges of anti-Semitism at UCLA, has there been a decline in the number of Jewish students who applied and were accepted? That's Jack in Santa Barbara who asked that question.
I do not know if there's been such a trend, but I want to send a very clear message to Jewish potential applicants to UCLA. You will find a safe and welcoming university here. If that's your fear or your reason not to apply, please apply. I guarantee you that you will find a safe, welcoming environment. And we have incredible organizations like Hillel, like Chabad, like other Jewish organizations of students who I hope can validate what I'm saying.
Geraldine says, I heard UCLA and other universities are losing postdoctoral scientists who are returning to China. Is this a serious brain drain?
That's a risk. Talent is universally distributed, and one of the elements for American prosperity and its superiority in science and technology and innovation has been the fact that it draws talent from all over the world. And I hope we can keep that talent here. That's why we are fighting to try to get our funding for research restored.
Do you have statistics yet for the fall quarter about international students, either undergraduate, a graduate, or postdoc, who to see if there's any sort of a reluctance to come to Southern California because of the administration's position about international students?
I do not yet have those numbers. But obviously it's something that we are very carefully monitoring. And again, we will try to keep the open character. Now, it's a very fluid situation. So I can't tell you exactly what's been the impact so far.
All right. Several have asked about academic freedom and potential limits on it. One of the questions in that area says, regarding UCLA faculty who publicly state Israel has occupied Palestine since the founding of Israel in 1948, and faculty who advocate de facto end of Israel as a Jewish majority nation, describe October 7th as justice and resistance. How will you respond to those professors or departments where that viewpoint is pervasive while supporting academic freedom and free speech?
You fight bad ideas like the ones you just expressed with dialogue. In a university, we use dialogue to process those differences. What we cannot accept are cases where some faculty will create a climate where people who oppose those statements feel intimidated and don't feel free to express. So we cannot, in the name of academic freedom, inhibit the rights of others to express a dissenting opinion without fearing of retaliation. So we need to keep that open, and so long as everyone has the freedom to express without fearing retaliation. I think we're okay. But what's happened, and I'm not saying it happened here at UCLA, but what has happened is that often, because of the hierarchical position between professors and the students, some students don't feel the freedom to contest some of those ideas. The other thing is that academic freedom doesn't mean you can use the time for instruction from students who are paying tuition to espouse your own personal political views. That is not academic freedom. You have a commitment to teach whatever you are supposed to be teaching, and not necessarily to voice your own personal opinions and try to convince students about that. And so if we accept those guardrails, yeah, I would totally disagree with the statement you say, but I believe that that's why we debate and we discuss and we try to provide evidence and standards of truth to deal with those differences. That's the essence of what a university is supposed to do.
You know, it goes beyond the Trump administration. The critique that higher education, particularly at elite American universities, skews heavily to the left, particularly in the social sciences, the humanities, and that students aren't necessarily getting a well-rounded exposure to a range of different perspectives. Is that something that you think as Chancellor of UCLA at all needs to be addressed? Is there a way to address that, or is that so baked into higher education that that's not really possible to sort of change those dynamics and what we see from polls of faculty members and composition of faculty? What do you see as your role with that, if any?
My role is what I said at the beginning. We need to move from polarization to pluralism. I believe in pluralism. I don't believe in that having a homogeneous, a hegemonic viewpoint imposed is consistent with the values of a university. We're here to debate ideas. We like diversity on every dimension, and that includes ideological diversity, viewpoint diversity, and the ability to debate freely without fear of retaliation or of violence being exercised against any member of the community. So within those guardrails of not making people feel unsafe, of not making expressions of hatred that provoke those elements of unsafety, the exchange of ideas, including opposing ideas, is healthy. That's why we started this whole process called dialogue across difference. It's the idea that we do not combat diversity of opinions. We don't combat those differences. We process them through dialogue and through the use of reason. that is what I believe is our most important duty and what we need to emphasize at this time. If we want to recover the trust of the American public in universities, we need to demonstrate, we need to be exemplary institutions. We need to be an example for the larger society that we can indeed process our differences through dialogue and respectful dialogue and not through violence and hatred. And if we do that for universities, we will also benefit the larger society.
Chancellor Frenk, that's a very nice note for us to end on. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us this evening in this hour-long conversation. I know our viewers appreciate it, and thank you for taking part.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it very much.
And thank you for joining us on this America at a Crossroads program. We always appreciate your attendance and remind you, just like this week, because of the holidays, next week it's a different time for the program. It's Tuesday morning, September 30th, 30 years since Oslo. Why did the Accords fail? And can the Israeli-Palestinian peace process be salvaged? Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, former Palestinian Authority Minister of Foreign Affairs Nasser al-Kidwa will weigh in, along with UCLA Professor Stephen E. Zipperstein and UC Berkeley Professor Kenneth Bamberger. The event, a collaboration with UCLA Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, the UC Berkeley Diller Institute for Israel Studies, and the UCLA Center for Middle East Development. The program, again, this coming Tuesday, the morning event at 10 o'clock Pacific time. And I invite you, please, to financially support these important programs put on by the nonprofit organization Jews United for Democracy and Justice. You can go to the organization's website, jewsunitedfordemocracy.org, make your tax-deductible contribution to help fund these important programs that come your way on a weekly, if not more, frequent basis right here. Again, thank you so much. Have a very good rest of your Thursday evening. We'll look forward to seeing you next.